Thanks everyone for joining today, the MLA Producer Demonstration Site webinar. We're hoping to be able to answer some of your questions in preparation of the call, which is starting on the 1st of April. We've got on the agenda today an overview of the PDS program and the different funding opportunities that we have available. So there's two different streams. We just want to provide an overview of what's involved in running a PDS project, so there's no surprises if you do get funded, and also just run through what's required in terms of putting a quality proposal together. We'll also just let you know what resources are available to you, and we've got a guest speaker today from Rob Shea from Perennial Pasture Systems. We'll finish up with a Q&A session, so any questions that you do have throughout the webinar, please put them in the Q&A tab, which you should find at the bottom of your screen, and we'll take all the questions at the end of the session. So feel free to put them in just as you think of them, and we'll save them up all for the end. So just to do a quick introduction before we get started of the people we've got on the call today or who's presenting today. There's myself, I'm Hilary Connors, and I'm the project manager of MLA's producer demonstration site. I've been with MLA now for 2.5 years, and prior to taking on this role, I was in the regional consultation team. So that's working with 3 research advisory councils around the country who actually set priorities for MLA's levy research, development and adoption programs. So I've started in the PDS position in about September last year. We've also got Russell Pattinson, who a lot of you may know. Russell has been working with the PDS program for a couple of years now, and Russell has had a consultancy business for the last 20 years and has worked across most agricultural sectors with a strong focus on strategic, operational and R&D planning and management and performance reviews. Prior to that, he was involved in the sheep and wool industry with group management experience in R&D with the Australian Wool Research and Promotion Organisation and marketing operations within the Woolmark Company. And he is a part-time national coordinator of the MLA's PDS program alongside Maria Thompson. Maria works with her company AgStar Projects, which she founded in 2011, and has managed and delivered projects across the red meat and livestock sector, including the beef, sheep, wool, live export and pork industries, as well as being the national coordinator of the Australian Intercollegiate Meat Judging Program. Prior to this, Maria worked in agricultural marketing and communications, beef genetics, and managed the national animal health and welfare portfolio for the Australian sheep meat industry. Maria works with Russell as one of our part-time national PDS coordinators. As I also mentioned, we've got Rob Shea, who's going to present to us from Perennial Pasture Systems. Rob has been involved in a number of PDS programs as a facilitator, so we thought it would be great to hear from someone who's been through it before. And Rob was the manager of family farms in the Ararat area for 34 years. He and his wife, Debbie, operated a self-replacing merino operation, concentrating on improved genetics and sustainable productive sheep systems. Since 2009, Rob has been project manager for the independent farmer group, Perennial Pasture Systems, where he runs the PDSs through. So we'll get to hear from Rob later. Just to begin with, I'm just going to give a bit of an overview of what the program's about, how the project call works, and how the priorities are set. Also, just how you get involved as a producer group, and then also give an overview of where the PDS program is at now, how many projects we've got, and some of the impact data that we've been able to obtain throughout projects that have been running across the last few years. So just to give you an indication of where we've actually got PDSs up and running now, you should be able to see from the map, there's a number of green dot points around Australia. So we've got PDSs running right across the whole country now. The intention of the PDS program is to ensure that the projects are run by producer groups and they're producer driven. They're regionally focused, and the intention is to demonstrate permanent practice change on farm. There is a really strong element of monitoring and evaluation to determine the change in what we call CASA principles, and that covers the changes in knowledge, attitudes, skills, and aspirations of people that have been involved in the projects. And also to record changes from the producers that are involved in practice change. And that is, with benefits in the areas of productivity, profitability, sustainability, and for social reasons. So that is a really important part of the PDS program, and it enables us to demonstrate impact quite significantly. I'll go into that a little bit further with some of the data that we've collected from the program to date. And I hope that helps you understand why it's such an important part of undertaking a PDS. There's another key element, which is undertaking extension projects within, extension activities within your producer groups. So that's just really important to actually assist with getting others involved in, whatever practice change you're trying to demonstrate. So just to begin with, we've got two streams that are the options which you can apply for. So there's just some key terminology just to keep in mind. One is the levy PDS stream, and the other is the co-contributor PDS stream. So in terms of the projects, they have the same structure, which is we ask for 10 core producers to be involved, and I'll provide a bit of a definition on that later. 10 core producers across 3 demonstration sites. So that's what we prefer, but we do have some flexibility for extensive regions and projects that may not be able to have those requirements met. And then we ask the duration of the project to be from 2 to 6 years. So depending on what type of thing you're demonstrating, you might need a project that runs for a little bit longer. So there is that flexibility there, up to 6 years. So for levy PDS, this stream gives you access to $25,000 a year of funding. And this is just, so say the project was a 4-year project, that would give you $100,000 total in $100,000 total across the 4 years. And it can be split. It doesn't have to be $25,000 in the first year necessarily. You can have 15 in the first year and 35 in the second year, if that's what your project needs in terms of the requirements. But you can't exceed what the guidelines are. So just keep within that $25,000 per year. And levy PDS projects do need to meet the priorities which are set by the research advisory councils. So I'll explain a little bit more about those in a second, but that's an important thing to note because producers from these research advisory councils, you may be familiar with SALRAC, NABRAC and WALRAC. They actually review all of the producer demonstration site proposals at the preliminary stage. So that is for levy PDS only. The difference with co-contributor PDS is that it gives you access to $50,000 per year. There is the need to bring 25% producer contribution to the table. So of those core producers that are involved in the project, they are putting forward a contribution. This does allow you to leverage some MDC funds though. So with the 25% producer contribution, this allows you access to 25% MDC funding and then 50% levy funding. So it boosts the total project value if you'd like to engage in a project that may be more expensive than $25,000 a year. Co-contributor projects need to address industry priorities. So that's the Red Meat 2030 strategic plan and also the MLA 2025 strategy. So just keep that in mind if you are looking at co-contributor model. Just to explain how we actually come up with the priorities, which are a really important component of Levy PDS. We utilize the framework, which is known as MLA's consultation framework. We've got 3 research advisory councils. So if you look at the top of the map, we've got the sort of brown color. That's the 11 committees that make up NABRAC. And NABRAC stands for the North Australia Beef Research Council. In Western Australia, where it's orange, we've got the Western Australia Livestock Research Council, and they have a number of producer members that make up that council. In the green zone of Southern Australia there, we've got SALRAC, which is the Southern Australia Livestock Research Council, and they have 7 regional committees which make up SALRAC. So across all of these committees in Australia, there's a number of producer representatives and they undertake annual priority setting. Those priorities then directly influence the terms of reference, which set the priorities for the PDS call. So those priorities are updated every year and they'll be put onto the website on the 26th of March, which is just 1 week prior to the call opening. So hopefully that just gives you a little bit of context to understand where the priorities come from. They are coming directly from producers and they're, we're linking them back to the regional areas. So we really encourage when you're putting together your applications to get in touch with these groups as well. They're available to perhaps give some context around the priorities that have been submitted and also just to, be a sounding board for some ideas that you may have for producer demonstration sites. But also there's a key resource there of producers that are really keen to engage with these types of projects. Now, this is just to give you an example of what the terms of reference and the priorities look like, which you need to address for the Levy PDS call. This is from last year, so I'll update it this year on the 26th of March. I wanted to put it up so you can just get an idea of what you're looking at. So we've got in the first column there, we've got different categories. It's broken down so you can easily work out which category the priorities under. We also have sheep productivity, beef productivity. It depends what is submitted by the councils as to what categories we'll have. So the priorities section, we just have, in the first example, we have 3 priorities that are listed under animal health and welfare. And then if you look in the third column, we've got the region of relevance. So basically the first priority there, which is the demonstration of the tools and management strategies available to transition to a non-mulesed flock, that is a priority which is relevant only to wool-rack. So only if you fall within the region, I'll just go back to my map. If you fall within the region that makes up wool-rack, so that orange region, you could submit a project which addresses that priority. And that's similar for the next one, demonstrates the benefits of addressing mineral deficiencies and the mechanisms for delivery in extensive regions. that is relevant to NABRAC and WALRAC, but not SALRAC. So just keep that in mind and make sure that what you're looking to address is a priority from your region. So an overview for those of you who don't know what is required in terms of getting a project funded. We begin the call in April. So on the 1st of April, we start accepting applications for the 2021 call. And the application period is open for 6 weeks. So that closes on the 12th of May. We then undergo application review, so preliminary application review. And for levy PDS projects, this is completed by producers and MLA staff. For co-contributor projects, they don't undergo producer review, so they're reviewed internally. At the completion of preliminary proposal review, we invite the successful applicants to submit a full proposal in July. And then we undertake a full application review in August and September. So by September, you would know the outcome, whether you had been accepted to submit a final application for the PDS project call. And then by October, you would be asked to submit a refined version of your project proposal, and it would be proceeding to contracting. So when you're thinking about when your project would start, when you're putting your application together, I would be thinking December 2021 to April 2022. So just to give you an idea of like the length between your first application and when you would actually be able to start the project work, it is a significant length of time. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, so just how do groups get involved? We have an annual call. As I said, it's in April every year, and we're looking to follow that timeline every year from now on. On the 26th of March, I will put up the terms of reference, and so that enables you to identify the regional priorities for levy PDS projects. And we'll also put up the selection criteria for preliminary and full applications, so you know what the reviewers are actually looking at. And we promote the call quite heavily on social media, through Friday Feedback and Feedback Magazine, and through our MLA networks. So please feel free to share anything about the program with your networks. To give you an idea of where we're at with the PDS program now, we have 65 active projects. As you could see from my map before, it's right across the country. We have 350 individual demonstration sites across those 65 projects. And within those projects, we engage over 800 core producers and over 7,500 observer producers. So core producers, for understanding the terminology, core producers are those that are directly involved in the project. They may be hosting a demonstration site themselves, or they're in the steering committee. You know, they've identified to be managing the project within the very core group. Observer producers are those that are within your network that might be kept informed of events, mailing lists, like on your mailing list to hear project outcomes, and you know, you could invite them to all the events, field days, workshops that you have. They want to be kept engaged with the project, but they don't necessarily want to be directly managing the project. At the end of in 2020, we completed an impact assessment of the program to date, and this data was collected off 22 projects that were completed up until 2020. So we were able to demonstrate a significant impact for those producers involved. On average, it was $6.71 per hectare average annual net benefit. And for those producers that were involved, that equated to an average of $7,266 per producer that adopted the new practice change. So in total, that was to the value of $126 million for all the producers that were involved in those 22 projects. So it's great to see that there's been some, really obvious positive outcomes from the program. And I've just got two examples of projects that have demonstrated some good outcomes. So I'll just run over those. The first one is a project that was demonstrating temporary fencing for improved lamb survival. And this was completed across 4 demonstration sites in Western Victoria using merino and composite ewes. The outcomes, basically, they improved pre-lambing ewe condition score, shelter and feed on offer, and they implemented smaller mob sizes at lambing, which improved lamb survival. So some of the impact data that we were able to get from that project was they improved twin lamb survival rates by 4.8%. They had a 9.8% improvement in the lamb marking rate. Overall, there was a 301% return on investment for producers involved in the trial. And the net benefit during the trial was $2.78 per ewe, $20.73 per hectare, and $15.06 for every lamb. So over a 10-year period, this was equated to be an 8-to-1 cost benefit in extra lamb survival that was obtained by implementing temporary fencing. The second example is the demonstration was the advantages of crop grazing and deferring pastures during crop grazing. So this was completed in WA across 4 demonstration sites. And the outcomes of this were there was 27% higher metabolizable energy and 2.5% extra feed on offer. So, and an 18% more digestibility of that feed base. 69% more food on offer in deferred pasture. And this resulted in improved ewe and hogget condition score and improved twin lamb survival due to increased birth weights. So in terms of impact, the crop profitability average equated to $81 per hectare over 3 years, and there was a net benefit of $11.42 per ewe and $4.75 per hogget grazed on these crops. A whole of business average equated to $15.67 per hectare for reproducing ewes and $10.19 per hectare for hoggets. Just a reminder, if anyone does have any questions, please put them into the Q&A box and we will answer them all at the end of the presentation. But for now, I'll hand over to Russell Pattinson, who will give you an overview of creating a good proposal. Thanks, Russell.
Thanks very much, Hilary. Really good summary. Thanks. Welcome, everybody, and good afternoon. I'll whip through this reasonably quickly, and as has been mentioned a couple of times, please don't hesitate to put your questions in the Q&A box. I'm just going to walk through some definitions very quickly, then talk about what might make a good PDS, some hints about preparing applications, most importantly, the necessity of setting really clear objectives. What are some of the key elements of the project and what's available in terms of templates for those. We'll touch on monitoring and evaluation on communication plans, on pre and post surveys, and then just a little bit about milestone reports and final reports. Thanks, Hilary. Next slide, please. Thank you. Hilary's touched on this, just a couple of definitions that we use in PDS land all the time. Core producers, These are the ones, as Hilary said, are directly involved in the project. They either have demonstration sites on their property or they are on the project steering committee. Observers are those that attend field days or get information through the group about the particular project. It's not only producers that are involved in these, but includes consultants, advisors, agents, and resellers as well. Thanks, Hilary. So what makes a good PDS? Just a few points in relation to here. First, it's really got to be producer group driven. The producers and the group really have got to be passionate about a particular issue that they've got and are really prepared to be involved and drive it. They also need to have an experienced facilitator or a consultant leading the project. The projects are all about seeking adoption of new knowledge or practice quicker than would normally be the case. So we're not talking about research projects here. We're talking about known knowledge or new technology or particular practice that we want to have adopted into the industry. And so there are other funding streams available for pure research and development through MLA. And of course, the aim is to increase the profitability and productivity in commercial systems and demonstrating those so that people are learning by doing. It's really important, as I mentioned, to set very clear project objectives that's addressing an issue, be that a RAC issue or an industry issue as per the Red Meat 2030 plan. Important to recognise these are not research projects, so it's critical to have a very clear, simple method and also including a control for comparison purposes so that you can say, hey, by adopting this particular practice, we found the improvements over business as usual were such and such. Equally, the methodology, as I mentioned, it must be easy to follow for both the producers, but also for the project itself. And again, Hilary mentioned that we have a strong focus on monitoring, evaluation, and reporting because we want to be able to measure impacts and demonstrate value, and also on the communication plans, getting the information about these projects out to both people within the group or indeed the broader industry, and we'll talk about that in a second. And so, look, some of the examples might be what a PDS project looks like, a new approach to increase lamb survival, for example, or an introduction of a new pasture species to fill an existing feed gap. Thanks, Hilary. So preparing applications, the process, as Hilary mentioned, there are preliminary applications assessed for a start and then going through to full applications. Make sure you've got really good buy-in from the producer group before you put your application in. Don't overcomplicate it. This is not research and development projects. These are PDS projects with a relatively good but limited budget. And keep the applications really clear and simple. The objective we'll talk about in a second, but that's an absolute crucial component to get right at the start, and please follow the guidelines. Concise method and sequence of events. Ask yourself, do you need Animal Ethics Committee approval for your project? And if you do, that'll be built into the first milestone. There's usually a cost to that of a few $100s. So make sure you've got that built into your budget as well. And of course, in the applications, there's coverage of monitoring and evaluation and communication plans. And those two components form a key element of the very first milestones once your project gets up and running. Thanks, Hilary. So project objectives, and I could emphasize that apart from having producer buy-in, apart from having a really good facilitator consultant managing and helping with the project, the next most important thing is to have a very clear objective for the process. So define what it is that you plan to achieve within the life of your project. And you clearly describe the objective, or if you want to call it something else, a key result area of what the project is seeking to achieve. And we say that they should be written in SMART terms. So be specific, make sure it's measurable, make sure it's achievable. make sure it's relevant, and also that it's time-based. And the next slide, if I could please, Hilary, gives an example of a SMART objective. So by such and such a date in a particular region in the state of, demonstration trials across, say how many sites, you'll increase or decrease whatever the trait or issue you're trying to change or impact. So it might be, will increase lamb weaning rate by X% by June 2024. So that says precisely what it is that you're seeking to achieve with your project. Conduct analysis of the costs and benefits of the trait or issue you're trying to change, to show, what is the impact and what is the return on investment for this particular approach. Then we're looking for some indication of how the knowledge and skills and confidence of the core and observer producers have changed as a result of being involved in the project. And then we'd also be really keen to have an estimation of the number of core and observer producers that will have adopted or maybe intend to adopt the particular trait or issue that you're changing. And then finally, the results of the PDS will be disseminated to particular target audiences in particular ways. And that might be field days, fact sheets, articles in Feedback magazine, press releases, etc. So look, when you're preparing an application, feel free to use that template to form your SMART objectives. It's, as I said before, a really important component of getting both your project funded, but also to manage it very clearly in what you're trying to achieve. Thanks, Hilary. So some key elements of all PDS projects. We've mentioned a couple of times already the monitoring, evaluation and reporting. Maria will talk about that in a minute. There is a template available. It's a simple approach that we're seeking. Indeed, the message I'd like to get across today is that PDS, we try to provide templates for as much as we possibly can, so as to make the administration of projects as simple as possible. Communication plan, again, we provide a template. Pre and post project surveys, they're mandatory for PDS projects, and again, we provide a template. Every 6 months, if you're successful with your project, you'll need to provide a milestone report. Again, we provide a template. They are simple, and we're expecting, a 2, 3, 4 page report coming back in, often supplemented with a technical report that you might prepare for your own purposes and your own members as well. And then, of course, there's a final report summing everything up, which again is a template that is provided for you. Thanks, Hilary. So that's the end of my session there. As I said, and I think there's already been another question added in. Thank you for those questions. Please don't hesitate to throw your questions into the box, the Q&A box, and I'll pass over now to Maria. Thanks, Maria.
Thanks, Russell, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see such a great turn up and lots of familiar names there in the participant list. So as Russell just indicated, monitoring and evaluation and reporting are a key component of the PDS program. They're an important element of the overarching red meat industry strategic plan, which is the Red Meat 2030, but also for MLA strategic and operating plans. The key reason for that is to demonstrate the overall return on investment to the levy payer, being the producers, which Hilary provided some examples of the PDS and the past projects. For the PDS in particular, the MER, or the monitoring, evaluation and reporting, really aims to demonstrate the program performance. So you'll hear us talking about the terminology CASA and confidence change a lot, and I'll get to that a bit more in the next slide. It'll also, the MER plan also aims to demonstrate the practice and behavioural change that happens on farm, which will ultimately lead to impacts and benefits both to the producers involved, but also to the broader industry. A key area that we're also really keen to get more information on through the PDS program and through the MER is to help identify the barriers to adoption and to really ask through the survey process as to, if you're not going to make a practice change on farm, then why? And the reason we're doing that is so that we can then help industry to address how we can work on identifying and addressing those barriers. As Russell indicated, there's an MLA template, and we provide training for those successful PDS projects that get up, and also ongoing support through Hilary, Russell and myself. So we've just been working with some of the new projects that have got up recently, and we're certainly providing lots of support to help develop those monitoring, evaluation and reporting requirements. The MER is also a key requirement that will be in the preliminary application and the full application form. So you will need to think about the MER nice and early. Can we move to the next slide, please, Hilary? So the PDS program is really based on the Bennett's hierarchy. So some of you who work in the extension space will be familiar with the Bennett's hierarchy, but it's essentially a framework which is largely made up of 6 key levels, being inputs. So what are the inputs that go into the development of the project? What are the activities, the participants, and the tangible products that come out of the project? It examines the changes in knowledge, attitude, skills, and aspiration, or the CASA change. Sometimes that bit of extension jargon can get a little bit confusing, but it's essentially the knowledge is, do producers understand? Do they have, how do they feel about this practice change or this technology? Do they have the skills and the know-how how to implement it? And what is their aspirations? So do they want to make the change? And even more importantly, do they need to make a change? So once producers have the CASA and the confidence to make the change, that will ultimately lead to the next step, which is the practice change or the behavioural change on farm. And then from that, it will lead ultimately to benefits to the producers and the PDS group. And then we even go more broader, and we look further into what are the benefits to the industry and also what are some of the key learnings from the project. We move to the next slide. So just to go in a little bit more detail of each of those steps from the Bennett's hierarchy, the inputs and outputs are really the question, what do we do? So it simply describes all of the inputs and all of the outputs of the project. So inputs might be the project processes, plans, having a steering committee, the amount of money that's invested and where did it come from, the number of participants, both the core participants and the observer participants. Outputs are the tangible products or that come out of the project. So for example, trial, demonstration data obtained, the communication products, number of field days held, workshops held, etc. Next slide. So then moving up that Bennett's hierarchy or down that Bennett's hierarchy on how that one was presented, it really looks at the CASA. So how well did we do it? It measures the change in the participants' knowledge, attitude, skills, and aspirations. And we do that primarily through the survey of participants, being the core participants, and also those indirectly involved or being the observer participants. And we provide a template for that, as Russell said, and Russell will go through briefly shortly. And what we aim to do is to assess the CASA before the project commences and then after the project at the end, to assess primarily the changes that the project's had along the way. The pre-survey must be done early at the start of the project. And the MER plan, as well as the surveys, form the first part of the PDS milestone reports. Next slide. So once we've had that CASA change, the MER then also aims to look at what the practice changes are. So has the project changed what people do? Have they adopted different practices or technologies? If they've participated or observed, or they've observed the project, have they changed what they're doing? And what are those specific changes as a result of the project? As I mentioned earlier, we're very keen to also find out if producers haven't gone back and made those changes on farm, why haven't they made those changes? Because quite often they will be our barriers to adoption, which we're also interested in looking at. So as I said before, this is also, the practice change is also measured through the pre and the post surveys of the participants, through the templates that we provide, and we provide support for you as PDS coordinators if you're successful to develop those surveys. And for this part, it also looks at, will people be more likely to change practices in the future in regards to their intentions or their aspirations. As well as looking at the practice change that happens through the duration of the PDS, MLA are also keen to survey producers right at the end of the project, once it's been completed, to determine the ongoing practice change. So that component's not your responsibility, but producers who sign up to be part of the program will tick a box in their pre-survey to indicate, yes, I'm happy to be involved in those later surveys to determine the ongoing impact and practice change that the project will have. Next slide. So the next component looked at in the MER is the benefits or the impact. So is anyone better off? Have people actually benefited from the project, and by how much? What's the impact? And we will also look at a simple cost benefit analysis. So what are the costs and the benefits from making those changes for individuals, both the core and the producers? So that's very much the participant benefits. And if we can move to the next slide. The final component of the MER plan is looking more broadly at industry benefits. So asking the question, is the industry better off? Are there key lessons or learnings for other projects that may be applicable? And the MER will very much ask questions such as, how might the broader industry benefit from the project? Who else might the practice change apply to? So there might be people or producers in other regions that could be likely to adopt the information. Has the information been communicated? And then also, what have we learned? What have we learnt that we expected? And what are some of those unintended outcomes, or what have we learned that we didn't expect, which are also some key findings from projects like this. And then the final one, are there lessons for other projects and other producers? Next slide, please. So that might be a little bit technical as to how we've gone over that, but we'll just move on now to look at how we'll measure them. So they're really quite simple. So in regards to inputs, it can be records of inputs, steering committee notes regarding decisions, the communications and extension material produced, and case studies, the surveys, pre and post surveys for the core participants and the observer participants, which we've spoken about, data collection at the demonstration sites, simple cost benefit analysis. And I think Russell mentioned that word a few times. One of the key mantras is keeping it simple. Media monitoring, and also surveys to be conducted at a considerable time after the project. And that's very much looking at those longer term impacts in the practice change, which will be an MLA role for the project, but at a later point in time. Next slide. So here's very simply the template with the evaluation level that we've been through today, with the CASA built on inputs, outputs, the CASA and confidence change, the practice change for those producers involved, benefits, and then general observations and outcomes. The next column is your performance measure. So just there, we've got a couple of examples in there for the CASA and also for practice change, and then the evaluation method. So for the performance measure, that we determine what is the, I guess, the target that we're aiming to meet, and then how will we actually evaluate that and what method will we use. So for the CASA and the practice change, for example, it's simply the pre and the post surveys to capture that baseline data and then to determine the changes in the knowledge, skills, attitude, confidence, and also the practice change that the producers either say that they have done, or also that they indicate that they intend to. Next slide. And that's it for me. If you've got any questions about the MER reporting, please feel free to pop those into the Q&A and we'll address them at the end. Back over to you, Russell. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. I'll whip through this because the communication plans, there's some training that takes place if you're successful, and there's templates available for you to fill out your communication plans. But I just wanted to mention that we expect that the projects will use a range of channels to communicate their findings to both their core producers, their observer producers as well, others that are in the group, and indeed on a broader basis again. So you've got a whole range of approaches: field days, workshops, press releases, case studies. We also want to keep the RACs very closely advised as to progress with these projects, so they're an important target audience, and also a channel to use to get out to their members. You might have a website that you update, use of your own social media, and also keep in mind the use of MLA channels. So things like Friday Feedback and Feedback Magazine are really useful to get your message out more broadly. Thanks, Hilary. In the communication plan guideline that we provide, it's got heaps of information, branding guidelines, the fact that MLA approval prior to distribution, which is always a quick turnaround, is required. There's templates for case studies and producer guidelines. There's an event flyer template that you can use. There's image release forms that you can use. And also there's guidelines about how to produce videos, etc., if that's part of your communication process. Thanks, Hilary. And there's a communication plan template that is very simple to use. And it's literally a sentence or two about the background, about what the challenge is that you're trying to address, who's the target audience, what are the key messages that you're trying to put across, what are the outcomes and what are the budgets, and then just a little simple framework that covers off on timing, how often are you going to run a field day. Let's say we'll have one field day per year, the communication tactic, and that is, for example, the field day. What is the channel that you're going to use, and what are the key messages? The messages being delivering the results of the demonstration sites, for example. Thanks, Hilary. Just in the surveys, again, we provide templates for you. So these are not onerous tasks. They're very simple. They comprise 3 sections, and we ask that they be done pre and post the project. And we also emphasize that we want you to keep it simple. So the 3, just very quickly, the 3 components are, thanks, Phil. Section A about the demographics, just name and contact details and number of animals that you manage and the area that you manage. Thanks, Hilary. Section B is about the knowledge and skills. So just asking a few questions about the particular topic that you're targeting, so as to make an assessment about the existing knowledge and then how that changes over the course by doing the survey again at the end of the project. And then, thanks, Hilary. Section C says, get a measure of how confident people are in the particular topic that you're demonstrating or assessing, and then whether or not they currently use the practices that you're trying to do, so that, again, we've got an opportunity to measure practice change over the period of the project. Thanks, Hilary. We even provide a spreadsheet that just allows you to simply capture the data from your surveys, and a simple way of then evaluating it or analysing it to come up with the key messages that 20% of producers that prior to the project commencing were confident to be able to manage twin lamb-bearing ewes, for example. Thanks, Hilary. Again, I'm sorry to be really rushed, but I'm just conscious of time. Please, any questions, don't hesitate to throw them into the Q&A box and we'll answer them at the end. I think back over to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Russell.
Hilary.
So I'll just give a few more details about what's required for the projects, and then hand over to Rob, who can just give a bit of a personal experience. So for the budget, it is really important that you work within those budget guidelines that have been given for the two streams, levy and co-contributor. So the budget will cover operating expenses, and that includes things like testing fees, advertising of workshops, catering, anything that can be brought back to an operating expense of the project. It will include travel for professional support, and it will include professional fees for project support. That may be your project facilitator or a consultant that you get involved as part of the project. Things that PDS funding will not cover are on-farm labour, any capital expenses, and any routine monitoring and data collection. As Russell said, there are milestone reports that are required every 6 months. And again, we just ask you to keep it simple. It's not intended to be an onerous task at all. There is a template for milestone 1, the very first milestone of the project. We ask you just to submit the monitoring, evaluation and reporting plan, as well as the communication plan and the template for your surveys. So the majority of work is done at the beginning of the project, and then they're really tools for you to be able to use throughout the rest of the project. Then every 6 months, we just ask you to submit a progress report, which basically summarizes any key outputs from the demos in the last 6 months. It provides an update on the progress against your monitoring, evaluation and reporting plan, progress against communication. So we just want an update on all the sorts of things you've been doing in terms of extension activities, writing articles, field days, whatever it may be. Minutes from any steering committee meetings, and a plan for what you will be implementing or what the project objectives are for the next 6 months. If there's been any issues to your project that have resulted in a change in methodology, that's a really good opportunity to give us an update. And the last part of that milestone report is just a quick 100-word summary, which provides an overview of where your project is at, the achievements to date, and that is important for us to help communicate to the industry in general what your PDS is up to. So that 100-word summary is shared on the website and also with the research advisory councils we mentioned earlier, SALRAC, NABRAC and WALRAC. There is a final report, which is just the final deliverable of the project. You can utilize all the milestone reports that you've submitted, so they can be a great resource to help put together this final report. At the end, there is a template. It includes the abstract executive summary, a background, the project objectives, methodology, results, discussion, and recommendations and conclusion. We also have just some summary tables to capture the key statistics, so like the number of sites that you had throughout the duration of the project, the number of people that you've engaged throughout the project, that's your core producers and your observer producers. So as Maria said, we ask you to report on changes in CASA, and you'll be able to capture that data from your pre and post project surveys, and also the practice change that you have been able to report, and a impact, so perhaps a cost benefit analysis of the what is the result of implementing the practice change on farm. In terms of helping you get up and running, if you are successful through the PDS program, we have a training session with all facilitators and anyone else from your project team that you want to come along. And we just have a detailed overview of the pre and post project survey, monitoring, evaluation, reporting, CASA, what's required in milestone reporting, and any other questions that you may have. So just some final key points, and then I'll hand over to Rob. So just you know, it is a competitive process. We do have a limited amount of funding every year. So I guess that's why we're holding this session. So if you can put together a really good application, you've got the best chance of getting funded. Clear, simple objectives and methodology are well regarded, and that sets up a really good foundation for a project. There are multiple stages to the call, so plan your project work to start in December 2021 through to April 2022. Utilize the co-contributor model where possible. So that's the stream which is required to have a 25% producer contribution, but it enables you to leverage MDC funding and really boost the project value. We've got the resources that are available to you. You know, they're available all the time on email, mobile, and that's Russell, Maria, and myself. The priorities will be listed on the website on the 26th of March, and applications are open until the 12th of May. So I'll hand over to Rob now, and Rob will just give you a bit of an overview of his experience having been involved in PDS for a few years now. So thanks, Rob.
Hillary, you can do that quick introduction.
Yeah, I gave you a bit of an intro at the beginning, but yeah,
sorry.
Rob, you can give another introduction if you like. Give everyone an idea of who you are.
Yeah, Rob Shea. I'm the manager of the PPS group. Before that, I was a manager of family farms in the Victoria area for around 34 years. So yeah, since 2009, I've been a project manager for PPS. So we'll start with the slides, please, Hillary. So PPS was formed by local farmers. We're an independent group. It was formed in 2007. And yeah, in reaction to diminishing services and lack of local R&D. Next slide, please. So PPS is overseen by an elected management committee. And as we mentioned, we've got a project manager and also an admin assistant who doubles as the Girls and Grass Group coordinator. Also triples as my wife, but so she was also a farmer for 20 years, so we brought a bit of experience with us. Our group is in a niche area, goes south and you're into the basalt plains where the perennial ryegrass systems work. We get too dry and too hot for them, and if you run north, we run into the cropping plains of the Wimmera. So we're looking at stuff in our region, but a lot of it's specific to other areas as well. Most of our members are in that niche area, but we do have outliers around Victoria and interstate. We conduct local RD&E projects. We have an annual conference each year and an annual study tour, which are relevant to our members. Our funding sources, the group receives funding from the Wimmera Catchment Management Authority and Glenelg Hopkins Catchment Management Authority through the federal government NLP2 program, as well as other government programs, conference sponsorships, members, and of course, MLA programs, which we're talking about today. Next slide, please. So you can just see our map there in relation to Melbourne. So yeah, we try and be relevant to our members, but yeah, a lot of our stuff certainly goes, covers other areas, northeast in Victoria and into New South Wales and South Australia. The projects are quite relevant. In relation to projects, PPS Group identifies an issue. It's not for chasing projects or dollars for their own sake. The issue is the starting point. And this time round, we've just started 2 new projects or other funding sources, so we won't be participating in the PDS application this time round. When we've identified an issue, we look at what's been done and around the issue, and is the issue relevant to our members and our region. We then look, do we need to do something new or an innovative, or do we just demonstrate and do some extension on things that have been successful in trials or in other places? And then we research funding options, and we have been successful in gaining MLA support for projects currently and in the past. Next slide, please. Just quickly note a couple of projects. This one is completed, but it's a good one to show the input of our members. We have a lot of aerospace pastures in our area, some which have been persistent for 50 or 70 years, some which have shown poor to average persistence. We asked members to be involved in this project, and I guess it showed the commitment of the group members that we wanted good pastures, but we also wanted poor pastures. And we did quite an intense study onto the persistence of phalaris, and we got some really good results out of that, which have been implemented on most member farms. All our projects are on our website, which is listed there, whether they're MLA ones or funded elsewhere. Next slide, please. Just a quick one on a current project, the current PDS we've got. It's actually in collaboration with AgVic, so that's working really well. Multiple part demonstration, numerous sites, so a lot of people have got involved in this one on farm, as well as looking at the results as we produce them. Next slide, please. So a few points there on PDS projects, and one of them that is quite interesting is that the project can have an immediate reaction. If something works straight away, it can get adoption while a project is going, and also people have a look and have input and suggestions into how to make things better. Just a couple of points down the bottom that are important to groups like ours who do multiple RD&E projects. There's a compounding effect from the overlapping projects, which reflects in members' knowledge and confidence to implement new or refined management practices. So instead of being one-off projects, ours have been able to build into productive pasture systems. Next slide, please. So PDS projects need commitment from the group to be successful. I've just listed the various components of a successful project. The site hosts have in-kind input with machinery or grazing management, and some of the projects can be a real win on their farm for being involved, but occasionally that can be a loss as well, but we have no trouble attracting members to be involved. The project manager, projects need to be facilitated professionally, and there is funding for that in the projects. A consultant may be needed in the projects. That depends on the skill of the facilitator. We've used a consultant on a couple of projects and not on others, just depending on what we needed. PPS appoints an advisory group to each project of 3 to 5 members who sometimes are a mix of site hosts and others who have got interest in the project. They oversee the project and keep an eye on what the project manager does, make sure the project's on track. PPS Management Committee oversees the group's governance and planning, so they have a big input into the projects that we look at doing, and especially in the initial stages, and collecting input from members. And the final one is the members themselves. They put up ideas, they support our extension activities, and in the end, they support and implement practice change, which means that successful projects really make a difference. Next slide, please. There's a real benefit to group members being involved. Group owns project, they put the project up, and especially host farmers and those that have input really learn a lot from it, as do those who come to the field days and get the reports. Fair bit of mentoring goes on. It's not an official thing that we do, but it is interesting how that happens as group members' confidence improves. People involved in the advisory groups also have capacity building in leadership and team building, negotiation skills. So yeah, that's a real advantage both on and off farm. And in the end, we're looking at improved farm profit and improved environmental outcomes. And I think we've been fairly successful so far in that. Hope it continues. Next slide, please, Hilary. Russell's probably done this over several slides, but I thought I'd just sum up some of the requirements of MLA. Initial application needs to align with MLA objectives. This isn't terribly onerous, but yeah, if you've got a project that doesn't suit what MLA are looking to fund, don't waste your time with it, I guess. The project applications take time. They're not quite as simple as Russell said, but they are fairly straightforward to get them in. If you're successful, a contract is drawn up between MLA and the group, and then the reports were noted. Russell talked about comms and the MER stuff. That's not terribly onerous either, but it does take a little bit of time to get it all correct and how they want it. The milestone reports are fairly straightforward. Russell mentioned that. And project communications are vital. There's not much point doing the projects if you don't get things out there. In PPS's case, we've got a quarterly newsletter that goes to members, a closed Facebook page where we update things. We do field days and extension activities. As I mentioned, the annual conference will sometimes have a session on a specific project. If not, we'll update it with a poster session. And we do a results report. The other thing required by MLA is a final report, and these are fairly complex, not quite as simple as was mentioned before. They do take a lot of time to do, but they're quite rewarding when you get them out. As you can see, a few of ours there. The time needs to be budgeted to do these, so that they don't just happen. And expert advice may be needed from the group consultant or someone from outside. But in the end, they're a great resource for group members and farmers in other regions. All these final reports are on our website and also on MLA's website. It's also optional to do an annual report, results report or progress report for group members. They can be submitted with the milestone reports as well. But they're very, very useful when it comes to doing the final report if you've done stuff as the project has progressed. Next slide, please. Just a few final points. So what was mentioned that it is a competitive process. So yeah, it is well worthwhile to, if you're going to do an application, to really get it right and get a few people to review it. The PDS program is well funded, provided you've got your budget right. There's not a set amount, so you've got a budget for it, and yeah, getting that right is important so you don't overspend. If you underspend, you've got to give some money back, but it's usually pretty straightforward to do all that. The PDSs do have progress payments, and just something to be aware of, that the first one is around 10% of the total of the project. So if you've got a lot of upfront costs, make sure your group can fund things before further progress payments come in. The project we're currently involved in is they're paid annually. So the projects are independent. The group plan and run them, and MLA have oversight from their consultant. But if you're doing things right and meeting all the obligations, you're left alone to do it yourselves. The MLA consultant is very important. They don't have a direct involvement in the project, but are a good contact for MLA processes and feedback from the reports you put in, and ask a few curly questions and everything like that. But that is a system that works really good. I've worked with 3 different ones, including Russell, and it's been a really rewarding process. Just an important point, that the PDS program favours existing groups, which are farmer-based or a group based around a consultant. So if you are looking to get a group together or things like that, make sure you get it right before applying for PDS. Next slide, please. Finally, some pictures of grass and an email there for me. So if anyone wanted any more info, feel free to contact me. Thanks, Hilary.
Thanks very much, Rob. All right, we'll move just into some questions now. And I've just got our contact details for the website, our email address, Russell, Maria and I's contact details here. So anything pops up after today, please don't be afraid to get in touch. I'll stop sharing my screen and we can just answer some of the questions that have come through while we've been talking. I'll start just with, there was a question Can we replicate PDS concepts across multiple states and regions? And does this represent one PDS application or does it represent multiple? So I think that there's a few elements to this particular question. One is, it depends which regions you're looking to work across. If it's, say, across Northern Australia, let's say use WA as an example. If it's looking at Northern WA and Southern WA, you would just need to ensure that the priorities are relevant for both regions. And that would apply for, let's say, WA and South Australia as well. So just ensure that you're addressing the priorities that have been set by the councils that submitted them. It would be preferable to utilise the co-contributor funding model for this if you were looking to do a quite large project that expands multiple regions. You would obviously have access to the MDC funding, $50,000 a year, which would enable you to run a bigger project like what you're thinking. But also, it's totally fine to have demonstrations, the demonstration sites across different state borders. So if you're in New South Wales, let's say, you can absolutely have a demonstration in Victoria, as long as you're addressing the priorities that are, you know, both relevant in both regions. I hope that answered your question there. Sorry, I just got to get the Q&A up here. I'll get Russell to answer the question, if that's okay. Are there any guidelines around extension activities conducted as part of the PDS?
Hillary, look, there's no specifics, but we do tend to ask that people, you know, most likely would have a field day per year of their project, that we'd expect that there'd be certainly correspondence to members a couple of times a year, and that's you know, more formal, not Twitter feeds or use of social media. We'd expect that there would be some sort of a producer guide, for example, that would be a legacy of the project, so that others could follow what they should be doing if they want to go down this particular path. So there's not hard and fast rules, but we'd expect that communication and the plans will be an important part within the project. The other point to mention is that MLA's communication team also help in pulling together that communication document. Thanks, Hillary.
Thanks, Russell. There's just a couple of questions on budget, which I'll address. The first is, are there costs associated with the PDS? For example, travel, professional time and speaker costs, paying the site host, that cannot be covered by the PDS budget. I'll answer them just one by one. Travel by the professional support in the project can be paid, not for producers that are involved in the project. Professional time and speaker costs, yes, that can be covered. Paying the site host, the site host would be one of the core producers in the project, and therefore they would be putting this time forward as in-kind sponsorship. You know, there is going to be a benefit of being involved in the project, so I guess that's, you know, the draw card to being involved. So hopefully that answers that question. I'm just reading them as we go, sorry. Is there any scope to exceed $50,000 a year for the co-contributor model? For example, if there were 6 to 10 core sites involved instead of 3. As a general rule, we ask you to work within the guidelines, and yeah, that's going to be your best chance of getting a project up and running. If you, for whatever reason, I think it would be best to just give us a call and talk through the concept that you're thinking of there. But yeah, as I said, general rule, $50,000 is the maximum. So work within that. Sorry, I'm just reading these. 1 second. MLA communication approval process. Is this for everything, including tweets? Tweets, no, that's fine. You can live tweet whatever you want. MLA, in terms of articles that may be written, flyers that may be distributed amongst your observer producers, anything significant like that, anything on your website, we would ask you to get MLA comms approval for those. There's a second question there. Budget. Is there anything put aside for administering the project? And it basically, I think it's just the admin time that's putting together the milestone reports, etc. I think that is, you need to consider that when you're putting together the project, the time and the resources that are available. Some in-kind sponsorship in terms of project support may be beneficial. Russell, do you want to add something there? You probably have a bit more experience.
Yeah, look, from an administration point of view, we mentioned about having the a facilitator or facilitators, and so we would be quite happy that administering the project, that preparing MERs and milestone reports, that the time taken for that can go in professional fees. Not a problem.
Thanks, Russell. And I'll just hand over to Maria for the next question. Are you happy to read that one out while you're answering it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Hilary, and thanks, Peter McGilchrist, for the question. So Peter has asked, in the initial phases, are there sessions for the coordinators and others about the principles of adult learning and what tricks are most likely to lead to practice change from past PDSs, i.e. what activities such as field days, etc., are most effective at initiating change? That's a great suggestion, Pete, and I think that the PDS project team comprising Hilary, Russell and I can certainly take that on board and provide a session on adult learning practices and principles, and also some of the outcomes from past PDSs. That's a great suggestion.
Thanks, Maria. I think there was just one other question that Russell has already answered, but we might as well just quickly answer it in person as well. So if you just wanted to, Russell, just re-answer the question about equipment and technology, that would be wonderful.
In terms of the...
Oh, sorry. The question was, will
Yep.
the PDS fund leasing of equipment and technology?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Leasing of equipment is fine. That's an eligible expenditure. Capital purchase of equipment is not an eligible expenditure, and we don't have that. And there's the question from Angus Australia that Hilary answered about the fact that most of the things that you've listed in your question are eligible expenditure, except for paying the site host, which is in-kind contribution.
Thanks, Russell. I think that is all the questions we had for today. Any other questions that come up in the next few days, please feel free to email us, call us, get in touch. And this seminar has been recorded, so we'll share that and we'll put it on the website within the next 48 hours. So if anyone missed it, you can share the link. You can rewatch it when you're putting together your application. So I think we'll leave it there for today. And thank you all for coming along. I hope it's been a useful session. And thanks to Russell, Maria, and to Rob for contributing today as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.